I am so excited to have Melanie Leone on the podcast today. Melanie is a former public school teacher with a master's degree in educational leadership. And over the course of her career, she's worked in multiple states, spent 5 years as a child care center director, went back into public school teaching, and then became an education entrepreneur when she launched Anchor Center for Learning in Stowe, Ohio just this past fall of 2024. And Anchor Center is a 3 day a week, multi-age microschool that emphasizes student autonomy, personalization, and inspiring a sense of wonder. So, Melanie Leone, welcome to the Liberated Podcast.
Thank you. So excited to be here.
I'm so excited to have you here. I think your story is so interesting, being a public school teacher, then being a child care center director, then back to public school teaching, and then microschool founder. So such a fascinating journey. I'm excited to hear all about it. But let's start in at the beginning of what made you decide to go into teaching to begin with, and what was your initial experience like as a public school teacher?
Sure. Yeah, I think education, definitely being a teacher was always on my heart. I don't remember a time when I wasn't going to be a teacher. I don't have a lot of memories as a child, but I do remember like shoving my dad in the desk in the basement with the chalkboard and being the teacher. And I just never quite let that go. Went all the way through high school, did the whole, what do they call that? Like volunteering with different teachers. Mrs. Potcutter was amazing. She was a first grade teacher and she allowed me just to go in her room. And I remember thinking, oh, this is what I'm going to do. Like there really was no question. So that's always been my story. So I went to undergrad, graduated from Ohio Northern, and then right out of college, I did what every kind of silly 23-year-old girl does is I just up and moved to Florida because they offered me a job over the phone, which was, I'm not sure I would recommend that to everybody, but that's what we did. It was eye-opening. I think that was probably the first time I ever really realized that not every school is created equal and where you live matters and socioeconomics matters. And I think I was hit with that reality right away. So I did that for a year in Florida, then missed my college sweetheart. So I moved back to Ohio for him. He was finishing grad school. We got married. And that year I worked actually in a charter school, which was my first experience with charter schools in Ohio, in East Cleveland. And it was their first year. So they were opening. So I was like on the ground floor of them opening a school, which was really cool and funny how God uses that now. But I learned a lot of lessons there. And again, was, you know, really seeing the inequalities in education and how each school was so different. So from there, we moved on to North Carolina, got married, moved to North Carolina. That's where I spent bulk of my public school teaching. And that was a different experience too. I mean, that was a non-union state. So it was very different than Ohio and Florida. It was country. So it was a different population of kids, great, great teachers, awesome leadership. But even then I had a sense of like, something's off. Like this doesn't feel right. I got really would get very, my Miss Smith would probably tell you that I was one of those teachers that was always saying, well, why do we have to do this? Why, what is this helping kids? Why are we keeping this data and that data? And why is a kid a spreadsheet number, not a name? Like those things
Hmm.
really bothered me, I think. So I went back and got my leadership degree from the University of North Carolina, Charlotte for leadership. I thought, okay, I'm going to fix it. I'm going to go from the inside out and fix this problem. That did not work out. So essentially what happened is we moved from Florida or Ohio back to, or sorry, North Carolina back to Ohio. My husband got another job opportunity. So we followed him. And at that point I had one little guy, he was 3. And I was pregnant with baby number 2. And that's when we came to Ohio and I knew I wanted 3 kids. So in my brain, it just didn't make sense. I was like, going back to public school to pay for 3 kids in childcare doesn't make a lot of financial sense right now. So I planned to kind of take a break, but we happened to rent on a street that had this little tiny privately owned childcare center. And that's how I fell into that world for a number of years.
Okay, so I want to talk about that in a minute, but let's just
Yeah.
back up a bit
Mhm.
because I think it's so interesting to hear about your public speaking, public school teaching experience. I'm sure there was a lot of public speaking involved with
Yeah.
that. And in multiple states. What grade levels were you teaching
Hmm.
or subjects? Was it all over the place?
All over the place. So I
Okay.
started in second grade, and then I moved to kindergarten in East Cleveland. And then I did the bulk of my career was in first grade, and then I did the latter part in fourth grade. So kind of all over the place.
Yeah, and you said you started to notice a little bit of the discontent
Yeah.
with the public school system
Hmm.
and just feeling the regimentation of that process.
Yeah.
And like you said, students being considered more like numbers on a spreadsheet than learners with different
Hmm.
needs and different
Yeah.
skills and different
Right.
levels, all of that. So, okay, so then you are back in Ohio
Hmm.
in a neighborhood with this child care center.
Yep.
I know you said that becoming the child care center director was really when you had the shift in sort of educational philosophy. I wonder if you can tell us about that
Absolutely. For sure.
transformation.
For
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. I knew nothing about the childcare world. I hadn't even sent my kids to one, so I really did not understand it at all. But I had this group of teachers, and I will say, I think it was my first sense of like owning a business too. I didn't own it, but the owners were very kind of older, retired, and hands off. Like really wanted you to just run it and make them money. So that was what I was charged to do. So I loved that. I got to do everything. I got to hire and fire and train and work with families and set up curriculum. And that was the first thing that they kind of asked me to do when we got there. There was no like cohesive philosophy. So you had some very old school traditional preschool teachers versus some that were kind of like unschooling kids and not doing anything. Not that that's not doing anything. There's a definitely a case to be made for unschooling. But I think they just were all over the place. So we had to go down the rabbit hole of different philosophies. And that's when we stumbled across Reggio Emilia philosophy in Italy. I immediately fell in love with it. And I immediately thought in my brain, I'm like, I don't understand. Why can't public school be more like this? Why can't we allow children to kind of pursue their interests and create these projects and have real meaningful work that they're motivated by? Why doesn't school look more like that? So that was really kind of my first feeling about it. And so we did that for a number of years. I really delved deep into that and worked with teachers to create that environment and loved it. Really loved it so much I tried to buy it. God told me no. So sometimes he tells you no for a reason. I'm learning that lesson. So it was no, I think. And I really, really tried to force that to happen and just wasn't working out. So at the end of that, I was like, all right, well, maybe it's time to move on. And maybe, my family had grown at that point. I had three kids. One was in public school, one was entering kindergarten. So now I'm down to one kid in childcare. At that point it made sense to like, okay, let's go back to school. Maybe it's time to, maybe what I've learned here will help bring that to another
Mm.
school center, and try this again. So that's
And
what
what was that like?
that did not happen. I tried. I actually, on paper, it was perfect. I found a school that talked about multi-age. Now by multi-age, they meant like put your kindergartners and first graders together. They didn't mean true multi-age.
Mm.
So that model didn't work well. But it also talked about Reggio and project-based learning. So it had a really beautiful vision and really awesome teachers. And so I'm not sure why it never quite came to fruition, other than, they really did still have to live in the box that public school requires. So there's a lot of challenges that on the leadership side of that. How do you do some of these things you want to do when there are these really strict parameters? And I think that's partly of what the tension was in that school. But so I gave it 2 years. I took my middle child went with me to school, which was great. And she had a great teacher. It still didn't feel right. And it still didn't feel like something I could get behind 100%. And if you're a teacher and you're not behind it 100%, it's hard. It's a hard world to live in. So yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, you said you got your master's degree in educational leadership. You
Yep.
thought you could make change from
Mm-hmm.
within. I mean, you sort of said that there are these constraints there, but when you're learning in the classroom in your master's program all about how to impact change in the classroom, what's the disconnect between that sort of academic vision and the reality of what you were experiencing?
I think, I mean, right now, I would say the biggest difference that I see is just the structural way we structure school.
Hmm.
In that it's really hard to build that idea that all 6-year-olds need to learn together and all 8-year-olds need to learn together and all of them need to learn on this timeline, on this scope and sequence, and you need to be teaching this lesson on this week. And if we really start to just treat children independently of that and think, what does this child need, where does that child fall on this spectrum of skills that we need them to accomplish, it's hard to do that in a school setting where you kind of are mandated by the end of test, and that test is coming and those are the things we're preparing for, and it's a little disconnect of what we want it to be versus how the structure is actually set up.
Mm. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more, Melanie,
Mhm.
about the Reggio Emilia educational
Yes.
philosophy. I too love it. I think it's amazing. And specifically, it would be great if you share a little bit about what it is, and
Mhm.
then, what are the limitations of imposing that in the conventional school system? Like when you said you first stumbled upon Reggio Emilia, you said, "Oh, why can't public schools
Mhm.
be like this?" Then you go to a school that's trying to incorporate that
Mhm.
philosophy. It doesn't quite work to the same degree that it may have outside of that conventional system. So tell us a little bit more about that
Yeah.
philosophy and its
Yeah.
implementation.
For sure. Um, so they have something called the 100 languages, which I love. That's this idea that children communicate in all sorts of different ways, whether that's through music or art or their written word or all sorts of different ways. And if we really take time to listen to what they're saying and what their ideas are, they have this natural curiosity. They have this natural ability to question things and wonder about the things around them. And so often, as the adults, rather than walking alongside with them in that journey, we kind of shut it down and say, well, it's this way or it's this way. It has to be this way. So I think that's one of those disconnects. Public school is very much I'm the teacher, I'm delivering knowledge, I'm giving you what you should read and how to read and all the things. We don't take a lot of time to listen to all the different languages that kids actually do communicate in. It's really beautiful in that it does a lot of open-endedness. So art is very open-ended. You give them beautiful materials and they create with those. And there's not again, which we do in public school a lot of times is here's the craft project, especially in preschool world. Here's the craft project. It's a duck. It looks like this. Here are the shapes. We try to, make that art project into a shape project. So it definitely it's more, let's learn about ducks and what are ducks and let's experience them. Let's touch them. Let's smell them. Let's what all the characteristics of ducks. And then I'm just flying ducks. I don't know why ducks, but and then allowing children to represent what they learned about ducks in their own way, the way that they feel best represents their learning. So all of those things are just beautifully said. And I think ideally, I wish they also have a very like Reggio has multi-age, so they're preschool, and this is all early childhood in Italy. So it's going to look different with bigger kids, but they are in these multi-age settings. Because developmentally, if you have a 3-year-old or a barely 3-year-old with almost a 6-year-old, the level of communication and collaboration they can do is just much better. So all of these ideas are beautiful and I love them all. And it's trying to figure out, I don't know why, um, other than again, it wasn't what are the children's interests and starting with that it was more here's the project that we're going to do, it's project-based learning, here it is, go do that. Again, we're trying to formulate it so much, and making sure that this standard's taught and this standard's taught and this standard's taught, that we're so standards focused that we're forgetting that often if the question starts with the child, you're going to create a beautiful project in the end.
Mm, right. So it was sort of starting with the curriculum rather than the kids.
Yeah.
And Reggio and similar philosophies switch that around.
Flip that around. Yeah.
And amazingly, then the kids will actually learn the shapes
Yep.
of the duck
Yes. Yeah.
more
They'll be in there.
organically
They'll
and
be, yeah.
meaningfully
Mm-hmm.
without needing that top-down
Yeah.
approach. So, okay, so you spent a couple of years there,
Mm-hmm.
and then what happened?
Then I was done. I was never going to teach again. So
Really?
I really thought so. I was like, okay, maybe this is not, maybe it's the end of this chapter and I need to figure out what to do. And then I took a break. I really did. I'm lucky. I have a really awesome husband who's very supportive. So he's like, you don't need to teach, just figure it out. I'm like, all right. So I did, took a break. And I wouldn't say I wasn't teaching because I did. I had a few babies and toddlers in my house. They just did Reggio in my home with them and loved on them and took a slower paced life. I sent my kids off to public school. So I still was in that very much public school mind. Like your kids go to public school. That's what you do. I mean, I was a teacher and that makes sense. And I just shipped them off without really thinking much about it. So that was kind of where I was at. So I took a couple years where I had a few little babies and toddlers, loved them, loved their families, a lot of new moms. So I just kind of came around them and implemented Reggio philosophies in my house with them. So it was easy and beautiful and simple. So that's where I was for a couple years.
And that was
And
sort of
then
an in-home daycare,
in
an in-home
home.
in-home
Yep.
preschool.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it was real simple and beautiful. And we went outside and played a lot. And I backed up to like a little bit of a woods so we'd be able to go out and hike. And it was great. And then COVID. So That changed everything, like
Okay.
it did for everybody.
Yeah, so that was sort of your initial foray, I
Uh-huh.
suppose, into being a founder and
Hmm.
having this
Hmm. My own thing.
small program within your
Hmm.
home. Okay. And so then COVID hit, and what did that do for you and your family?
So then I had some families reach out to me. So these were daycare families from the years before. Now these kids were school agers. So they contacted me and said, we need help. We are working. We can't do this. Our school's shut down. So they said, could you maybe open your house to a few kids? So there I was. I had 7 kids, fifth grade through kindergarten. Mine was the youngest. He was in kindergarten. Um, and so I really just managed. And then I had a retired teacher that worked for me at the daycare. And I said, hey, can you come and help? I need you to help you manage babies, toddlers, and take care of them, make sure they're taken care of. And I'll do them during school hours. Whole craziness.
And
That
this
was
was still out of your home. So now you're running essentially two separate
little programs.
classrooms.
Yes, I have like a COVID
Yeah.
program going on and then babies. Um,
Yes. Okay.
it was wild. It was a wild year. So that's where we were at. And I was just managing, really. I was managing, their Zoom schedules.
Mm,
But the truth of it was these kids were at my house because their parents were working. So these kids were at my home for, 6, 7 hours. They were only on a computer for an hour here, hour there.
mm.
So there was a lot of time to fill. And that's where Reggio came in. And I was like, well, what do you want to learn about? What are you curious about? And so there became, kitchen projects and volcano projects and anything that they were into. We just would go down the rabbit hole and Reggio project it. So that's kind of what it looked like. And then I had my 2 kids. This is the first time I even thought about homeschooling.
Hmm.
My 2 that I had, I could very clearly see now they weren't getting what they actually needed. Like it was very obvious that,
How was that obvious? Was it through Zoom school?
yeah, through Zoom, and now they might have been, they were getting, one was getting exactly what she needed. The other one was struggling. And I thought, you know what, this isn't working. This doesn't make any sense. I know what they both need. I know where they're both at, in their development of learning. So I'll just homeschool them. That seems like the reasonable thing. And that's when I got introduced to the homeschool world. And I thought, wow, they're onto something here. Like wow, I never thought about it, but they were able to really personalize the learning for their kids and make it meaningful in real life. And I was like, wow, they have the best deal here, these homeschoolers. So that's where I was introduced to them. So I was kind of managing this COVID world, homeschooling my own 2, and then making sure that the other babies were taken care of by my friend. So yeah,
And this was so was this the fall of 2020 that you were homeschooling your
yeah.
kids
So it
or
would have been right when
2021?
right when we shut down. So our school shut
Okay.
down. Yeah, like right, pretty much, immediately, and never really went back for a while. So it was almost a full school year. Now, I think they went back towards the end of the spring, and I sent them all back, and they all went back to their schools. I even sent my 2 back. I was like, okay, COVID's over. There you go, back to school.
This
Um,
was spring of 2021.
2021.
You
Mm-hmm.
sent everyone back. Okay.
Went back and went back to life. I started babysitting those babies again. My friend was done, so she left, and I thought I was done, and I could not. I just kept thinking about it and obsessing over it. And that's when I went and I was like, there's got to be a podcast because I'm a junkie on podcasts. So it's like, there's got to be a podcast out there that tells about other school models or something. So that's where I found you. I Googled and your podcast came up. And then I binged you for like a year of all the stories and just kept like writing it down and thinking about it and talking about it to everyone who would listen. And they all got really probably annoyed. And my wonderful husband is very supportive and great and has always been like, go for it kind of guy. And finally, he's like, just do it. Like, what are you waiting on? Just give it a whirl. What's the worst that can happen? It doesn't work. Okay. So that's what we did. So I went
So
for
I want to hear, yeah, I want to hear about
it.
that go for it
Yeah.
stage. But you said, you couldn't stop thinking about it, after you sent the kids back to school and COVID wound down, you said you were obsessing about it. Why do you
Yeah.
think that was? What
I
was
think
that like?
2 things I think really stuck with me. One, I've gotten closer with my children, like because life had slowed down. Um, and there were less expectations. There were less after school things. I suddenly had more time with them to read books and talk to them and do different projects that we never would have done. When kids are in school 5 days a week, 7, 8 hours a day, and then they're coming home and doing homework. And going to lessons. And it's like you're trying to cram those moments into Saturday and Sunday. And it just, that opened my eyes a lot. And I couldn't shake that idea. Um, I couldn't shake the idea that my kids had things and interests that they wanted to do. Like one of them wanted to learn to piano, and in my brain, I was like, we can't fit one more thing into the weekly schedule. Like, so there were
Mm.
these extra things that they were curious about and they wanted to learn about, but we didn't have time. There was just not enough. If there was, that meant somebody was getting, traveling to things one more time in the evenings. And then you're giving up your family time. So it's just, so I couldn't shake that idea. Um, there was another point I vividly remember. There was a couple kids online and they were doing math lessons with their teachers. And then there was a kid that was sitting, an older kid, like a second grader, was sitting on my couch with this little toddler reading a book out loud to him. There was one kid at my table two kids at my table doing a volcano project where they were drawing diagrams and labeling and planning out their, actual volcano they wanted to make. And I just remember standing there and everybody was engaged. Everybody was happy. And I thought, like all my years of public school, nobody's ever all been engaged. Like they just, and I think the multi-age really stuck with me, because these were, the volcano kids, there was a fourth grader and a second grader. Why can't a fourth grader and a second grader who have a common interest come together and learn together? The abilities are different. So just beautifully, it works better because one can read better than the other and he can access all these questions he's got research for. He's got tons of questions. The second grader's got a bajillion questions about it. And that fourth grader is able to access that information for them so much faster and together. So I saw that moment. I remember being like, oh, this is what it should feel like. This is what it should feel like. And I couldn't quite stop thinking about it.
Okay,
And
so then,
then I was hearing all your stories, which were also, putting more fuel on the fire. Like she did it, they did it. Well, they started with two kids. I could find two kids. I already got two of my own. I could find two more. So, like,
yeah, it's
start
that
small.
it's hearing others just
Yeah.
like you, entrepreneurial parents and teachers, having success and having that sort of personal fulfillment that
Yeah.
comes with running a microschool or a similar program. So, what happened from when you kind of had this idea and your husband said, just go for it to
Yeah.
launch? I guess what was the time frame of that? And what did you do kind of leading up to
So it's
launch?
kind of like I guess it would have been like a whole school year that it took me to actually pull the trigger.
Okay.
Um, and really what happened in that is me just modeling it out, trying to figure out what I wanted it to look like. What were the good things about public school that I would keep? What were the
Mm.
things that I wanted to definitely shut the door on? Really envisioning like, what do I want the day to day to kind of look like, feel like? And once that was kind of there, then it was like, well, the next step is, can I find a place to do this? Like, so that was just reaching out and trying to find a location. Okay, now I have a location. Now I need to talk about it. So what does that look like? Now I need to find students. So it's just one step after another. And finally just making that decision that yes, I'm going to do this in, September 2024. Like here's the date, go. And so really that year was me making a list of all the things that needed to happen in order to open the doors in September and just doing the next thing.
And why did you decide to have an external space? I mean, you've been running programs
Mm-hmm.
out of your home. Did you know right away that that wasn't the model you wanted? You wanted this to be
I
somewhere
also,
else?
yeah, I had also run home product things out of my home. So I also knew while
Yeah.
that was beautiful, that also required a lot of daily cleanup, a lot
Yeah.
of, if I wanted to have any space as a family, we don't live in a mansion. So we were using our space very creatively when I had all those kids in there. And it
Mm.
was a lot of to maintain and I'm kind of a minimalist in that regard. Like I wanted it put away at the end of the day so I could
Yeah.
shut that part of my brain off. So I knew that I needed a location. Yeah.
So what did you find and how did you find
Mhm.
it? Because location is often a
Oh,
challenge.
it's such a challenge. Yeah, so I found a church that was willing. I targeted churches that already had either preschools in them or other programs that they were running during the day because I knew they were open to allowing programs in. So I targeted those types of churches and I probably sent, I don't know, 25, 30 emails to different churches in the area. I was open to location as far as what city. I wanted to be within, a 10, 15-minute radius of my home, but outside of that, I was open to wherever God told me yes. So he did. He gave me a cute little church, gave me it started with just one classroom that first year. We ran out of 3 rooms now. And we're actually moving locations in the fall to a bigger church. So Yeah.
Incredible. Okay, we'll talk about your growth in just a
Yeah.
minute. How did you then recruit families? You said you started to get the word out once you had the location. Um, Getting those initial families, those founding families is so
Believe in
crucial.
you is insane.
Yeah. What
Yeah.
was that like, and how did you go about
Um,
that?
I really credit that to direct sales. Like, so I was in a direct sales company for a long time, which
Hmm.
really got me comfortable, I think, talking to people more, and more comfortable on social media. So I think the bulk of my finding was social media. I really joined any homeschool kind of group that I could get my hands on. I partnered with some other, Melissa is a homeschool mom that I connected with back in the Akron school days when I taught in Scope. So I had kept in touch with her, and she was now homeschooling. So I reached out to her. So any connections that I had, I reached out to. And then I just started sharing the philosophy and the vision and the mission out there on social media daily. I mean, it was time consuming, but doing that daily. And then those initial families, I think they were just like minded, and then they caught it and they took a chance on it. And they're almost all still with me now. So I mean,
Wow.
definitely they've been, they took a chance for sure.
Yeah.
But I think just communicating it clearly online is really where I found the most of them. And then I had, set schedules of open houses where people could come and see the space. And some days I would show up and nobody would come. Some days I would show up and there'd be four families that would drop by. So it just really depended. And then I also hosted like Saturday morning just coffee chats that, and I still do those. So that way somebody can come and hear the vision, mission, ask questions, um, and then come see the center if they want to come check it out. So I think that's just ongoing all the time.
Yeah.
And I just
Oh,
got
great
lucky.
trip.
I just got
Great
lucky.
tips.
Yeah.
So you launched September of 2024 with how many students?
So I had 12 counting my two. We
And
ended
all different ages. What was the
all
age
to
span?
the oldest child was in sixth grade, which I was not going to do sixth graders. I was going to do K-5. The sixth grader, and the youngest was kindergarten. And then I gained a few. So at the end of the year, we had 14.
Okay. And
Yeah.
now you're growing
Mm-hmm.
even more.
We have
And yeah, so tell us about.
we have 32 right now. Um,
Wow.
yeah. And so we're done growing this year. We're going to stop now until next year.
Okay. Tell us about how do you make that decision?
It just feels right.
Okay.
It just feels like the right number. We're managing this number well. We actually just brought on two new ones last week. So we've got time to get these two going and rolling. And then just, it's a good time to just wait until the fall when we have more kids and more space, I should say, more space.
So 12 students to 32 students in
Mm-hmm.
less than 6 months.
Yeah, it's crazy. Mm-hmm.
What is attracting these families to your model?
Um, I think most of them would say the personalization. I definitely feel like we're getting a population of kids that don't fit in the box in some form or fashion. So either they're really gifted, insanely smart, kids that are behind a little bit and they need more, or special needs kids, or really high functioning kids with autism. So, I mean, we're just getting this wide variety of types of kids, um, which is awesome. And the model's working for them because it's so personalized and because it has a lot of autonomy and freedom and figuring out what works best for each kid, rather than your kid needs to fit like this in a box. Yeah.
And so they're all homeschoolers now in a
Now,
program that's 3 days a week.
mm-hmm.
Are most of the families coming from a conventional schooling background, or were they homeschooling previously, or is it a mix?
My initial group, in the first year was mostly homeschooled families. Trying to think if there's really any. Maybe three to four of them came from like a private school, but not the public school so much.
Hmm.
Um, and now this year, it's overwhelmingly mostly public school kids.
Really?
The
Okay.
new kids, yeah, mostly public school kids. And then there's still the handful of homeschooling ones. The homeschooler family, actually, it's more like the homeschooling families that are coming to me are actually, they're more kind of inching towards the middle school years, and they just want, they want something stable with community for their kids, more so than they're done with homeschooling. They love homeschooling. um, they just maybe want their kids to have, something that feels like their class, their community. Yeah.
So it sounds like you could keep growing if you wanted to, but you're capping out right now at
Yes.
32.
Mhm.
But clearly there's local demand.
Absolutely.
And
Yes.
so what does next fall look like? What is the future here? Will you expand days? Will you expand? How big will you get? Tell us about the growth plan,
Gosh,
Melanie.
I wish I knew all those details. I would have better sleep at night if I knew all that. I think it's shifted in my brain already. I really, really love what I'm doing right now. What I think will shift is we'll have the 3 day program always. I really enjoy that. I think that gives them a good consistency. We do Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, which allows for long weekends, or if families want to take a little mini trip somewhere, they have a little chunk of time. Um, so I love that model. I think there's opportunity for that Monday, Friday. I'm not sure what it looks like, whether that looks like intervention. I've pulled a a dear friend of mine who's an intervention specialist. She's kind of working alongside me. So she runs her own program on the side to make sure that we're really doing inclusion and IEPs and kids like that really well. Um, so maybe it looks more like intervention for families that need it on that Monday, Friday. Maybe it looks like a la carte fun courses of dance and music and all sorts of things on Monday, Friday. Lots of ideas up there. Maybe it looks like a high school program Monday, Friday. I don't know what it looks like, honestly. I'm just taking one step at a time and trying to master what we got going better before we add any other programming to the mix.
Yeah, and I'm just curious if the newer families that have been joining who are coming from conventional public schools, are they asking for 5 days a week or are they content with the three? Yeah.
Initially, yes, I did have some families who asked for the 5 days a week for sure. And
Mm.
I really debated it, talked about it with my staff, tried to figure out if that was the right thing to do. I really feel strongly, though, that one, in about 2 hours a day, we can give you reading, writing, and math on your level without a problem, with no issues, and give you lots of other time to, pursue interests and go down rabbit holes that you really want to go down. Um, I fear that if you turn over it to be a 5 day program, it very slowly could turn into essentially what a typical model would look like.
Hmm.
Also, it takes away that partnership part. Like in public school, that we would all, I myself included, would say it's a partnership, but the truth is, it really isn't. It's the teacher's responsibility because she has that child a lot of hours during the week, and the parents have other responsibilities and other things they're doing at home, and ours truly really is a person, it is a partnership. They know what their kid's working on, and they're going home with things, and they choose to expand on that as a home, or they can choose to put it aside and do something else that kid's interested in. So I like that it's a partnership, to the fullest that it can be. So I don't know that I will ever make it a 5 day program.
Mm.
Now, it could maybe be built into a 5 day program if those other 2 days are something different. Maybe they are like an a la carte, there's a pianos, there's all these different topics that they could pursue that they wanted to. Maybe someday, but we're only in year 2 and I'm trying to make sure we master this part well.
And what is it like for you now as a founder?
Mhm.
What's that experience like?
I think it's definitely, I feel like it's what I was meant to do. Like if I go back and look at all of the parts of my past and where God said yes or no or whatnot, like it's all led to that. Like it's all led to this time. The people, even the teachers that are working with me, they've all had a part in that story somewhere where we've met in the past. And now I'm saying, hey, come back, let's do this together. Um, so I feel like it's exactly what I was supposed to do all along. And I think if you just talk to my friends or my family, they would tell you, oh, I'm always been the person with like the ideas. I will say, hey, I have this idea, and it's probably the first time where I've had an idea that it's like, this makes sense. Like, how would you not do this? It's not just another big, crazy idea, which I tend to have sometimes.
Ah, so great. What have been some of the biggest challenges or obstacles in this journey?
Doing the things I don't want to do, like I hate
Mm.
looking at finances. That's like the least of my favorite things. So really learning kind of what am I good at? What is this person good at? And really equipping the people who are good at things to stay in their lane and do those things well. Um, that's been a little bit of a challenge. And that's just, I think my daycare world has really come back full circle in that, learning how to manage people,
Mm.
finding the right space. When you're renting someone else's space, it still feels like their space sometimes. So trying to find ways to make it our own without, compromising that it's a lease. So
Mm.
that's a little bit of a challenge. I'm excited about the new location for those reasons. Um, and yeah, just finding that right location that's not going to cost you an arm and a leg and the overhead cost of it. Um, Luckily, I have a really supportive husband who's, not expecting me to make millions on this, just, you know, employ
But
my employees.
yeah, I mean, do you see a pathway though for
Mhm.
a financially sustainable business where you are
Absolutely.
able to get a paycheck and pay your staff
Absolutely.
well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely, for sure. I think the having the intervention alongside us is making
Mm.
opening up opportunities for the kids. And on both ends, I just never expected that. That wasn't on my radar either. But it makes sense. I think if you're building, a school that is personalized and flexible and allows for autonomy, obviously a child with, any kind of special need is going to fit in beautifully in that model. So it's the first time in my career I've been able to see like what inclusion actually is supposed to look like. Um, and it's really beautiful. So I think, yeah, partnering with other people and getting out in the community more. And there are a lot of people who believe in this. Vela opened my eyes to that. Like, holy cow, there are people who will get behind you that do have money and want to help make those things happen. So yeah, I'm just excited to see how that
Yeah,
looks.
you mentioned Vela, the
Mhm.
entrepreneur network supporting education entrepreneurs like you, building these unconventional spaces. And as you think about advice to other founders, what would you say to them as they begin this path? Thinking about your experience listening to this podcast and getting inspiration from others. Now you're the one providing inspiration. What would you say to them?
I just say go for it. I think the hardest thing is just to have the courage to do it, and just be okay with knowing you're probably going to mess up here and there, and there's going to be hiccups and road bumps. But every time, I think, even now, I mean, we're only, what, a year and a half in. I think each week my teachers were like, okay, this worked, this didn't work. What if we do this? This is working for this kid. It's not working for this kid. Like having those daily, just being okay with realizing that it'll never be done. I don't think it will ever be done. I think if you're doing it right, you'll always be saying, okay, that was good. How do we make it better? That was good. How do we make it better? Um, and sometimes that's scary, but you just have to have courage and go for it because it's a ton of fun.
So great. So just to clarify,
Mhm.
I've been saying that you started in September of 2024, but it sounds like it was September of 2023. So if it's been
23
a
to 20,
year
yeah,
and a half.
23, year and a half. Yeah.
Okay.
So we have
Okay.
23 to 24 and now we're 24. Yeah. So
Got it.
we're in year two.
Got
Yes.
it. So you started with a dozen kids in the
Mhm.
fall of 2023. Now you're a year and a half in, 32, and more would come if you let
Yeah.
them, but you're capping.
Yes. Yes.
Um, maybe as we begin to wrap up, Melanie, I'd
Yeah.
love to hear how you measure success. Tell us about the sort of academic and non-academic measures. You've already mentioned that most of your founding families have stayed with you. So retention is certainly a key indicator. But what else? How do you know that the children are learning and that the program is successful?
Yeah. So like I said, we do reading, writing, and math. Those are kind of our core, what we focus on. There is a ton of science in it because we're doing project-based learning in different areas. They get lots of science. I think for us, the literacy piece, we do use like a phonics-based scope and sequence. That's very measurable, learning to read, decodables, all the things. So the science of reading, I'm a big proponent of that. So finding a program that works really well for that.
Mhm.
The other piece is we kind of lean on Charlotte Mason philosophy for our literature. So the kids are all in book clubs. They have book clubs they read together, whether they read it together, whether we read it to them, whether they read it independently. And then we work on oral and written narration within that. So you do have kind of a from the beginning of the year to the end book, seeing how they've developed in that, in their comprehension and in their writing, obviously. So you're seeing that as a portfolio kind of review. We do progress reports. So our progress reports are narrated. So we also narrate, how are they doing? What are their struggles? So parents know where we're at in that process. And then Math is very obviously easy to monitor because we do use technology for that. So we offer them 3 different online math programs and they can
Hmm.
choose which one works best for their child. So that obviously has reports and, scores that you can see how things are moving along there. So that's how we measure like the academic piece of it. Um, for me, success is in the kids. So if they are loving coming to school, then we're doing our job. So I had a little guy, well, not little, he's in 6th grade, and he really struggled. I mean, you could tell he had a negative experience with school. We had tears getting out of the car, a lot of anxiety, all of the things. And, when I get text that says, he says he loves school and he comes in with a smile, those are things that matters more than anything. So the kid's attitude about school really is my number one indicator, if we're doing things right.
I love that.
Mhm.
And then in terms of accessibility, one of the great things about micro schools and similar models is they tend to be more financially accessible to more families. They tend to be lower cost than traditional private schools. Yours is a little over $5,000 a year with sibling discounts
Mhm.
and that sort of thing. Do you find that works for families? How is accessibility?
Yeah, it's pretty doable for most families. We do fundraisers too. So I promise we've done one. We're supposed to do 3 a year. So the next one's getting ready to roll out. And I allow the fundraising to go to their tuition. So if you raise money, whatever you personally raise as a family goes right to your tuition. That's been super helpful. Ohio does have some great programming for kids with IEPs. So if you're low income, a child with an IEP, there is some programming there that we can help fund your tuition through that. So there are some programming things that are the state does that we've been able to take advantage of as well as teachers. So there's ways around it, and I try to work with families, obviously. But yeah, pretty much everybody's been able to manage their tuition.
Amazing. And
Mhm.
what do you see as the sort of future of the microschool movement, these emerging schools and spaces? You said you didn't really even think about homeschooling until COVID, and now here you are running a flourishing microschool. Where is this going?
As a nation, where's it going?
Yeah, as a movement of
Oh,
these emerging spaces. Yeah.
I think I would have thought I was crazy myself had I not gone to Vela. I think when I went to Vela, the conference, I was just,
VelaCon.
eyes
Yeah.
were, yeah, thank you. My eyes were open to the whole thing. I just was like, wow, there are people all over the place doing really awesome things, out of the box, different, real life type schools, just creating things from scratch. And I had zero idea that was happening before I went there. I really had no clue. So I think I would have thought I was nuts, and I think people have thought I've been nuts in the past, been like, why? Why are we doing this? This doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense. And so I think that really gave me the confidence to see, okay, well, this is a movement. Like there are people everywhere. I've made friends. I've got a friend, Lindsay. She's got a place in Maryland that, we've been talking nonstop since she started, just daily communication over what are you doing here? What are you doing there? So things like that are fantastic. I see it's going to change education completely in the next 10 years. It's just going to look very different. When somebody says, where do you go to school? It's not, oh, I go to public school. That might be an option. I think that will always be an option for kids. There are some kids that thrive in that model. So I don't think it should go away. I think there should just be a lot more affordable options for families to choose what works for their kid.
Mm. Such a great vision,
Mm-hmm.
Melanie. So, you are located, and the
Mm-hmm.
Anchor Center for Learning is located in Stowe, Ohio, in the kind of greater Akron area.
Yep.
If my listeners and viewers
Mm-hmm.
want to find out more about the
Mm-hmm.
Anchor Center for Learning,
Yeah.
follow your progress and your growth, what should they do?
They should probably go to Instagram is probably the best place where we are. I'm giving you my name there, which is just at Anchor Center for Learning, but the number 4 in the middle. That's definitely where in my Facebook page we update that all the time. Um, Daily updates, what the kids are up to, what we're working on. So that's probably the best place. And then from there you can find my email and my website's all connected to all of that.
Yep, and it's
With the number.
anchorcenterforlearning.com, the
Yep,
website.
anchorcenterforlearning.com. Yep.
Amazing. Well, I have loved chatting with you.
Oh,
I hope
fun.
to get out and visit
Oh, yeah,
one of these
anytime.
days. It would be
Yeah.
wonderful to see your location up front.
Yeah.
And best wishes to you,
Thank
Melanie. Thanks
you.
so
Thanks
much
so
for
much.
being on the
Thank
Liberated
you.
podcast.
Thank you.